Okay, hello. This is Eliyahu Holly, and I'm with my very, very dear friend, Rebecca. And, well, Rebecca is what I would consider, I've always considered her, she's a friend for many, many years. I've always considered, and I know Rebecca to be a modern day prophet, or shall I say prophetess, or shall I say prophetess. And she gets, well, she's been getting messages from Jesus for many years now. She has prophetic dreams, which are amazing. And she has a story. Um, she has a story about how Christ came to her and saved her life when she was very young and and very lost, which is simply amazing. In one of my previous homes, she led two evenings where she talked about her story. Um, so Rebecca, um, okay, so maybe you just begin a little bit with the story about how it all began for you.
All right. Well, firstly, I mean that's a pretty tall billing to live up to, Prophet. so,
Okay,
but
that's my
that
opinion.
that's for Eliyahu, and that's fine. I mean, usually people weren't called prophets until after they were dead, but we'll see if history bears it out.
Okay,
But you can also call me Sam or Sue if prophet doesn't fit well with you.
just don't call her late for dinner. That's
That's
all.
it, yeah. So, the story. Well, the beginning of the story has never ended. But the beginning was 1969. And at that time, gosh, I was 21. So you can do the math. And also, you'll have to just sort of, this is easy. I hope that we'll talk another time. But to get things in perspective memory wise, in 1969, I was 21. Um, at that time, I mean, I was in California in the United States, and it was probably right in the middle of sort of the youth drug rebellion. I guess
Yes.
that's the best way of putting it. And everybody was susceptible. I didn't come from a broken home. I had good parents. We were middle class. So I'm saying that it just went across the U.S. and everybody was susceptible. That was the times we were in. You know, the hippie Volkswagens and the music and the Woodstock. Um, However, that that recourse was available to me. Maybe that's what I would say. I don't believe I got into it because I was part of the hippie movement or that wave that was experimenting. I was going through my own soul searching at 21, and that the drugs were available for me to use, um, and I used them to escape and eventually tried to escape to the point of death where I attempted suicide. And so how do you get to that place? Well, in that generation, I was growing up, and um, help me out if you remember something.
Well, the fact that you discovered you were adopted, was that part of your pain?
No, no, not at that time. I discovered I was adopted when I was 7, and but I had an inquiring mind even as a child. I remember probably around that time, probably linked to the discovery of being adopted. I was also at 7 years old questioning God why I was here, and I was not happy about it. I was an intelligent child, and my parents, rather than relating with me, were trying to um, put me into a path for that intelligence. So I got lost as an individual and a personality. And I did everything. I rebelled. I did everything I could not to use that mind that God had given me. And so I was angry at God for that gift. I was angry for being intelligent. I was angry for being a cute kid. And that was at a very, very young age. Anyhow, there's some other stories that happened around the time I was 11 or 12. And we lived near the ocean, and at that time I had a dream where I wanted in my dream to commit suicide. And I was not a drug user then. I was a 12-year-old kid.
Why?
But I was not happy here. I couldn't understand, from what I didn't have the maturity or the understanding to I don't know what you would call it, to synthesize what I was seeing in the outward world. And of course, nobody told me that children didn't have to have the ability.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wasn't dealing well with the pace that the world was headed toward, and I couldn't see any future for myself in this world that was going so fast. And so at about 12 years old, I had this dream, and I dreamt that we had a jetty. That's a group of rocks that go out into the ocean to break the waters coming in. And it was a storm, and I swam out in the storm, and the huge waves picked me up and was going to take my body and slam it onto the jetty. And at that point, the dream stopped, and God spoke to me and said, He said, I have put you on earth for a purpose.
Wow.
Choose this day, life or death.
Wow.
Now, this was only in a dream, and I said, well, I choose to live. And then it all changed. The storm ceased. It was a beautiful day, and that was the end of the dream. That was the first inclination I had that God could possibly be involved in my life or even care. I didn't have that concept. I mean, we had stories. I was not raised Jewish. I was, and my parents were not religious, but they sent me to Sunday school and this and that. So I was familiar with the biblical stories, but that's all they were. There was no way to translate those into an everyday experience. Or, for instance, if you're an observing family, or if you're a religious Christian family, those stories and those are brought into an everyday living experience. We didn't have that. I had the stories, I had the symbols, but there was no connection. Does that make sense?
Sure. In other words,
And I'm sure many people have the same thing.
of course, it's more like a cultural thing than a living faith.
Yeah, it was not in the heart. It wasn't really it was in the intellect. It wasn't even in the memory. It was something
Yes.
that I had knowledge of, but there was no reality to it. So, in fact, so there was no way I could even speak to my parents about a dream where God speaks to you.
Or anybody.
Or anybody at that time. So I was going to say one other thing about that time in life, but it seems to have, I lost it.
Okay, but so anyway.
So I went on. I had a very rough teens. That's when I got into drugs. And when I was 19, my daughter was born. I was engaged but didn't marry the young man. And so by the time, 18, 19, around 20, I wasn't on heroin long, but around 20, I really went into drugs heavily because my parents took my daughter, and for good reasons. I mean, her mother was on drugs. I understand more now, being older, much older, and having raised children myself. They might not have done well, but they did what they thought they needed to do. Anyhow, so by the time I was 21, I was using drugs. I was suicidal, and I had been arrested and was on felony charges, and in a private hospital. Which,
A mental hospital.
well, it was a hospital with a private psychiatric ward. Okay, so it wasn't a state mental hospital. It was a regular city hospital with a private psychiatric ward.
Okay.
Which, thinking back as I'm talking to you now, was probably a blessing. You know, the situations in our life, whether we choose to believe it or not, are orchestrated for our good. You know, there's different beliefs. Some believe that we have a say in that. Others, and I'm not sure about that as far as I'm concerned, but I do know that God loves us very much, and situations, He works with what He has, and they'll be orchestrated for our good. If I had been put in a state institution and forgotten there, it would have been very bad. It wouldn't have brought me to where I am 42 years later. But being in a psychiatric ward in a private hospital was a small enough where somehow my psyche and soul and spirit could deal with it. All right?
Yes.
I mean, I haven't never thought about it this way, but every time you tell a story, you get new insights. Anyhow, so I was there.
So we're getting to this amazing part of a divine intervention which saved Rebecca, but there was already something in the court. Wasn't there something in the court?
Right, I was up on felony charges.
Mm-hmm.
So those were pending, those were waiting. So those I hadn't been to court yet. That comes after.
Okay, very good.
After. And at this time, I turned 21 while I was in the hospital. And they had a craft room, and in the craft room, I remember painting a picture in watercolors or oils that had a picture of myself and my daughter. The interesting thing was we were both had our heads covered religiously.
Yes.
And in the center of the paint, and we were crying, and in the center of the painting there was an outstretched masculine hand, so you could see, for instance, my daughter and myself, and this hand reaching out to us. And in the center of the hand, the way the creases and the folds go, by the way, I'm an artist, so that's how I was able to way back draw that. There was a wound in the form of almost a cross.
Okay.
And I would walk by that. I took the picture to my room, and when I walked by it, I'd weep. I had no understanding. I would, and I'll probably tear up now, but that's all right. I would weep because there was something being spoken to my heart and my spirit. And so one night in my room, and I'd been in the hospital a couple of times, and this time I had tried to commit suicide, and they kept me there because I also had a felony court case pending. Okay, and in that sense, if that should happen, if the felony, if I was convicted, then I would lose my daughter. And so one night, when I passed by the picture, I heard these words spoken to me. You'll have to cut part of this where I
No, I don't think so. Go ahead.
This is 42 years ago. And I suppose the reason I'm tearing up is because that reality has been with me for 42 years. It's not something that's dissipated or left. But the voice speaking to me, it said, "Rebecca, if you take my hand, I'll wipe away the tears." And how do you know that it's God when God speaks? Well, I'll tell you, if you believe that He's your creator, there's something in you that will know. There's no way I can define it, because we're all individuals. We were created uniquely and differently, but you will know that you know when it's God that speaks you, because that same voice spoke you into creation. And you know. And He said, if you will take my hand, I will wipe away the tears. And at that point, the thought of surrender came to me. And I remember just weeping and at the foot of my bed, and I said, well, I asked God to take my life, to take what was left. and yet and I didn't know to surrender. It's something that my spirit person or spirit or higher self, as Eliyahu would probably refer to, am I correct? Knew to do. I said, just please take what is left. I'm so tired. And I remember laying down on my bed and the room filled with a white light. It was almost like particles, but it was mist, a white. So there was a presence in it, and there was such peace. And at that time, I just let myself go in it because I really thought that was the end, that God was going to take my life. And I just gave into it because that's what I had been trying to do all along, was to take my life. I didn't know that there was life, and that the life that he's talking about is different than the life without that. It's something totally different. And I was surprised more than anybody when I woke up the next morning.